Hello everyone, I'm Paul Bako and I'll be taking you in your project management module. So last week we looked at an introduction to project management. For today we'll be looking at contemporary issues in large complex technological projects. If you look at the image right now on your screen, what can you see? Anyone? So if your guess was a spaceship, you are incorrect. If you say a UFO, you are also incorrect. So this is actually a space telescope, and this is a very good example of a large complex technological project. For today, we'll be making use of a different case study. I'll be introducing it during the lecture. Let's look at some of the learning outcomes for today. The first is for students to be able to describe the key characteristics of large complex technological projects. The second would be for students to be able to discuss some of the key contemporary issues facing this kinds of projects. And lastly, for students to be able to develop strategies for mitigating the risks and challenges associated with large complex technological projects. Let's look at what exactly is a large complex technological project. LCTPs are defined as projects that are complex in terms of their size, scope, technology, and/or stakeholders. They are often critical to the success of organizations, but they also come with a number of challenges. So a lot of organizations now they make most of their revenue from the projects that they execute on a year-by-year basis. Let's talk about some of the key characteristics of these kinds of projects. When you talk about the size of a project, we already defined it as large. Now, an organization, for example, might call a project large and another organization will call that same project small. Again, the reason for this is because there are different ways to look at a large project. You can look at it from the point of view of how much the project costs. You can look at it from the point of view of how many people or project members are involved in the project. You can look at it from the point of view also of how long would it take to complete this particular project. Then when we talk about the complexity on the project, you can look at it from the point of view of the number of people also on the project. Think about it, when you have two people together, for misunderstanding or conflict to arise, it's very simple. Think about your partners or maybe a former partner. How normal or how arguments just do arises sometimes for no just reason. Now think about when you have 200, 400, 1,000 people working on a particular project. A lot of things can go wrong. When we now talk about, we can also look at the complexities from the number of activities in that particular project. Now, these activities are most times interconnected. So the more interconnected they are, the more complex it becomes. When we speak about uncertainties in projects or risks, they are very, very related because we do refer to risks as known unknowns, but we refer to uncertainties as unknown unknowns. So when we use this word to state that risks can be identified before they occur, and we can plan for it before it occurs. But for uncertainty, it's just like a driver that uses a side mirror. Sometimes you might encounter blind spots, and that can easily lead to accidents. This is basically the same thing for uncertainties. When they occur, you don't see them coming, and when they occur, they can easily affect your project's quality, budget, and even duration. Then when we speak about technological projects, the domain itself is very dynamic by nature. It's ever changing. And if you are an organization, they don't have a choice. They need to be able to come up with the best technology, or they need to be able to buy the best technology. If they can't do any of those two, then their balance sheets, their financial statements would suffer a lot. Let's look at some of the key contemporary issues in LCTPs. We'll begin by talking about the scope creep. I'll be introducing my case study right now on a project I managed. This project it's about 3 to 5 years old. Actually, it's about 4 years old right now. So this particular project was to deploy a health management system to 57 hospitals. The issue we had, the scope creep issue that we had on this particular project was as a result of the engineers were deployed to a couple of hospitals. Now, when they get to the hospitals, some of the heads would tell them, oh, this is not how we do things here. We want this to be added. We want this to be removed. But instead of the engineers to get back to me to inform me that, oh, this was going on, they just went ahead and they began implementing some of those recommendations. And that led to scope creep. This occurs when scope of a project is not well defined or controlled, and new features or requirements are added to the project during the execution phase without the proper approvals. This can lead to delays, cost overruns, and even quality problems. The next issue we'll be looking at is on communication. 90% of the job of a project manager is to communicate. So that's the main job of a project manager actually, is communication. But remember that it's not just communicating anything. He has to collect data that he would use to communicate. LCTPs often involve large team of people with different backgrounds and expertise. This can make it difficult to communicate effectively and to ensure that everyone is on the same page. The major communication issue I encountered on this particular project was, number one, it was quite a large project. We had more than 200 internal stakeholders. Those are people that were on the project. We had more than 100 external stakeholders on this particular project also. So trying to communicate with everyone, the issue I was having mainly was that I couldn't get everyone. Like, you can schedule meetings, you can go to their offices. It was just almost impossible to meet everyone during the planning phase, and that led to lots of issues on this particular project, because it was only during the execution phase that I was able to meet everyone. Then the next issue is the limited involvement of stakeholders. It's important to involve stakeholders early and often on LCTP. This helps to ensure that their needs are met and that the project is aligned with your organizational goal. Now, this is very similar to the second point. I'm going to continue speaking. So during the execution phase of the project, what happened was the stakeholders would now tell you, oh, okay, would now actually tell you what their expectations are. And now, you knowing their expectations would actually mean that it automatically means that you know that you are doing something that they would not like, or you know they are doing something that they would not approve of. And that, if whenever you don't get the necessary approvals on your project, it only leads to delays on the project duration. So it was just a very trying moment. You need to, on your project, always identify all stakeholders involved in the project. Always ensure that you understand what their expectations are on the project. Then also understand the amount of influence or power that this particular or all stakeholders do possess, because that will also determine how you should manage them. The last issue we'll be speaking on today will be the lack of risk management practice. On complex projects, it's very difficult to have a robust risk management practice. On my own project, we did the best we could do with the little we had. One of my key recommendations was to actually get a subject matter expert on health projects, but that wasn't approved. So I only have to make use of my own expertise and also the expertise of all the team members to try and identify potential risks based on the critical tasks that we had seen on the network diagram that we developed for the project schedule. So it is important to have a robust risk management plan in place to identify all risks, assess the risks, and mitigate the risks on the project. The risks that occurred on my project was a delay by a supplier. Because I was working with data, we're talking about health records here, there was need for me to get a third-party vendor to come install an encryption software. What happened was they were meant to come, for example, in the next 2 weeks. They didn't come after 2 weeks, it came after 1 month. and they were meant to finish it in 2 weeks. They didn't finish it in 2 weeks. Basically, their entire delay cost us about 6 weeks. We'll just look at some of the solutions to some of the issues that we've identified. You can make use of the right project management methodology, and this would help you to minimize some of the operational issues you have on your large complex technological projects. So the use of project management methodology that is tailored to the complexity of your project would go a long way in helping you to complete your project successfully. There are a number of different project management methodology available, such as waterfall, agile, and even some hybrids. And there are also others that have not been listed here, but these are the two major ones that we'll cover. And also, when you mix the two together, you can create a hybrid methodology for yourself. It's important that you choose a methodology that's appropriate to the size, the scope, and complexity of your project. So if you look at the images below, they depict the agile and the waterfall methodology. That's the one on your left-hand side is the agile, the one on the right-hand side is the waterfall methodology. We mostly use the agile methodology when the scope of work is not fully known, as common on technological projects. And we use the traditional methodology when you have a full idea on the entire scope of work. In my case, I had a general idea of the entire scope of work on my project, so I adopted the traditional methodology. But I also took some aspect of agile methodology to help me in the operational part of managing my project. For example, some of the meetings they do, like the stand-up meetings, where they have so on other projects, you can have a weekly 15 minutes meeting to catch up with the project team. So I liked the idea of it and I adopted that because I didn't want to have any long unending meeting. I think 15 minutes is appropriate. We'll also just discuss the key points. If you have any issues, bring it up and I'll try and help you resolve it on the project. The next solution to some of the issues we spoke about is to ensure that you have a clear and concise project charter. The project charter defines the high-level goals, scope, budget, and timeline of the project. It also states the key stakeholders, their roles, and their responsibilities on the project. We have a sample of a project charter template on this particular slide. It's not important to always use a template or a document. Even an email can suffice as a project charter. The project charter appoints the project manager on a particular project, and this is done during the initiation phase of a project. After this is done, you can now go ahead and begin planning the project. So you will make use of this document to begin that process. The next solution I'll be speaking on is to ensure that you've developed a risk management plan. The risk management plan should be robust enough that it identifies all risks, also assesses the risks, and it also comes up with mitigating or risk response plan. So we have a sample of this. I made use of a quantitative risk assessments for my own project where I was able to list out as many risks as possible. I was also able to score the likelihood of this particular risk occurring on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being very high and 1 being very low. I did the same thing on the impact of the identified risks on the project using the same scoring system. And then I calculated the risk rating, which is the likelihood of the risks occurring times the impact on the project. The risks with the highest score, rating are given the most attention as against the risks with the lowest rating. Then also a risk response plan is also put in place in case those risks occur. We would know exactly what to do immediately. The last solution I will be speaking on today would be to always ensure that you have a communication plan. The communication plan cannot be developed without a stakeholder plan in place. So the first thing to do is to always ensure that you have a stakeholder register where you list out all the stakeholders involved in the project, preferably not as an organization, but by name. So for me, I had the name of the person, I had their organization, I had their contact details in case I need to call anyone. I also went ahead to add some very sensitive information. Now, this document is advisable for it to stay confidential throughout the project, and even when you're done, because you have to include things like how much influence does this person have on this project, how much interest does this person have on this project, what are the different stakeholders, what are their expectations. So you use this to now create the communication plan. The communication plan just looks like what we have currently on the slide. So it keeps stakeholders informed on the project progress and any changes to the plan. This would help to manage expectations and to avoid surprises. So I will have, for example, I have the client executive. What is the communication method? I would ensure that I always will have a committee meeting where we meet maybe once every month. Then what's the frequency? I would state it. Who is responsible for the meeting? I would state it. And is there going to be any notes? Is there like an agenda, any key thing I need to state, or I also need to state it. And now this plan is also given to all those stakeholders, and it's basically how once they approve it, then this is how communication will be managed on the project. Remember that this is the main job of a project manager: communication. So do you have any questions so far? All right. So if there are no questions, let's move into our in-class activity that would become a home activity. You are going to be divided into groups, and each of the groups you're meant to pick at least one of the issues facing LCTPs. You have to carry out additional research where you have to discuss those issues and identify some opportunities that can mitigate these issues. Think about the project that you've managed. No matter what, everyone has managed a project. It doesn't need to be a complex project or a technical project. Then you have to develop a poster or a presentation slide, and you'll be sharing this in class next week. Please ensure that it's not more than 10 minutes. Each group would have just 10 minutes to do the presentation next week. So in summary, by now, I'm sure you're able to speak about the key characteristics of LCTPs. You should also be able to discuss the key contemporary issues with LCTPs and also come up with mitigating response plans to those issues. Remember to come with your laptops for next week, because we'll be making use of Microsoft's project in class. And also always remember to look at your core reading materials, which is where this particular lecture was produced from. Thank you everyone for coming for today's lecture. I will see you all next week. Have a great day, everyone.